Hi, I'm Dr. Christian Conte, and most of you know out there I'm extraordinarily passionate about what happens in the prison system. And today I have one of the best leaders in the field of corrections with me, Secretary John Wetzel. He's the head of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Secretary Wetzel, welcome to Emotional Management.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to get kind of what's going on in DOC out to staff and inmates and family members, and I think it's important that people understand what's going on. And I appreciate you taking your time here on a Sunday to do that.
100%. So let's start with just how are things right now in the Department of Corrections?
Yeah, this is. I think we're good right now, but it's intense times. And people say, "Are you worried?" No, I'm not worried. I'm concerned. We have this COVID-19, this coronavirus, and certainly, listen, DOC is an emergency planning agency. So people say, "Do you have a pandemic plan?" Of course, we have a pandemic plan, but it's important that people understand what's different. And what's different is this corona, people can carry it without symptoms. And that's different than any pandemic we've ever dealt with before. So it's really forced us to try to stay ahead of it and take steps that we haven't taken in other pandemics. Now, I think it's important that people understand who the we is. Our decision-making group here at DOC, one of the first things we did is we brought on a public health doctor, Dr. Nick Scharf, and he is our, I would say, medical advisor. So every decision we make is with medical advisement. It's working with Department of Health and Dr. Levine. So we have the most recent information around corona, and then we apply our correctional expertise to that. And I'll tell you, I feel good about our strategy. But again, there's so many unknowns in this. I mean, we're what, 3-4 weeks in now. And I think the good news is we only have a handful of inmates and a handful of staff who've been tested positive for coronavirus. I think that's the good news. And I think a lot of that is because of our strategy and more importantly, the way our staff are carrying it out. I mean, I can't tell you how appreciative I am for the men and women who, every day come to work, do their job. I mean, we have the best team in the country, and it really is proven this. And how appreciative I am of the population. It's not fun. I mean, we're now 1 week into quarantine where we're literally spending most of their time in their cells. We've tried to maintain contact with the community through phone calls and Zoom visits, but it's not easy. But I'll tell you, absent them working with us, like the mask, you and I both have right. Masks around our neck. And the only reason I don't have a mask on is because I'm sitting in my conference room by myself.
And I'm able to talk to you from home today. So that's really the only reason why we don't have it on.
I mean, I'm appreciative that we have, staff and inmates producing these. They're producing these for the department, producing these now for other state employees. Starting tomorrow, every state employee who has to go to work is getting a mask from DOC. Like, I'm proud of that stuff. But
and honestly, I've talked to some inmates who were genuinely appreciative that we've taken these steps. And I said, under your leadership, we've been able to get these out, to get to inmates, to take the necessary steps. Like you said, we don't see this. It's not like this is something that we can actually visibly see. We can be carriers and not know. So these proactive steps are necessary. To me, one of the things I appreciate about your leadership is that it's not sitting there about worried, it's about what can I do? And that's been your focus. What can I do? So what is this, what's your overall strategy here for the Department of Corrections?
Yeah, so let me start by explaining kind of the why. And things are going so fast sometimes I'm probably not doing a good enough job of just explaining the why behind everything, right? So when you think about you hear people and you hear rumors about how, corrections are petri dishes from that. That actually comes from real experience. There's some systems around the country who got the virus and were under normal operations. And keep in mind that the incubation period, so the time that someone actually gets the virus until they start showing symptoms can be as much as 2 weeks,
Mm.
right? So the first thing we did is stop visits way back on March 13th, which seems like a year ago now, right? Because it's been really intense. But March 13th, we stopped visits and we started, and then March 14th, we started doing health screenings to include taking temperature on anybody who came in. And that's because someone could literally not have symptoms, but be carrying the virus. And because this is an outside-in threat, we felt like doing that would put us in the best posture. Shortly thereafter, in the advice of our medical folks, keep in mind that this virus is shared through liquid coming out, so droplets coming out of your mouth. And now what they're saying is even aerosol. So like when you're sneezing, the droplets are very small. So on the advice of our medical folks, 2 weeks ago, we started putting masks on people, and frankly got some pushback from certain people. Most people were compliant, but now, as of a couple days ago, now the president and the CDC is recommending that everybody wear masks. Yep. And keep in mind, it's not perfect, right? So you hear like N95 masks, and these are not N95s. N95s mean that 95% of the particulates are screened out, right? And we use those for our medical personnel, for direct contact, for our intake officers, transports, for inmates who are being transported to the hospital. But these masks, what they do is like me wearing a mask with you protects you from me, and you wearing a mask protects me from you. So that's why we did that. Again, if you look at these systems where things spread, and there's the spread of this virus, it's called community spread, right? So initially, when there was 1 or 2 cases, the Department of Health was able to track them back to who they contacted, right? And so we're at that phase where we have 1 case, and then we track back every contact. We put them in quarantine for 14 days to see if they develop symptoms or not, right? Or test them.
But that's something for people to understand that you're doing. Once you recognize that you're doing all this stuff, and I think sometimes that people, when they don't see what leadership is seeing, they're not recognizing that. So I think that's important for people to hear. Once you identify, you're going out and trying to find all the connections with it.
Yes, and so one of the things that we found early on, and by leadership, I mean, keep in mind that our structure is leadership, centralized leadership that looks system-wide, and then local leadership that's making the same decisions. And I think one of the things that has really gone well throughout this is the communication between the institutions and central office and the field. I mean, keep in mind, we have parole officers out in the field, we have community corrections, but getting back to that tracking thing. So we have someone, we test them, and we do have testing capacity within the Department of Corrections. That has not become a limiting factor. Then we track back all the contacts, and then we were putting everybody in quarantine. And then the next phase of what we did is really kind of reduce movement. Out here in the world, they're calling it social distancing, right? Not be around a lot of people. When you are around them, be 6 to 10 feet, because basically, if God forbid I sneeze and don't cover my mouth with my elbow, like Dr. Levine tells us to do, then that 6 to 10 feet range puts us in a place where we likely won't breathe that in.
Right.
But that wasn't enough, right? And what we learned from the first case we got, once we tracked back, and we got the first case last Saturday night, was the first positive inmate test. What we learned in tracking that back is that individual had a lot more contacts with a lot more people than we thought, even with our modified movement. And that's why last Sunday I made the decision to just quarantine the whole system. It was not, I got to be real clear, this is not like a disciplinary lockdown. This is not like you guys aren't doing what you're supposed to do. This is reduce the number of people you come in contact with, because it is absolutely true. The less people you interact with, the less likely you are to get corona. The less likely you are to get corona, the less likely everybody is, and the more likely that we will all walk out of this healthy and safe. And that's everybody. That's staff, that's inmates, that's parolees, that's parole officers, that's everybody and all of us.
But see, that to me, there were a couple people, and again, I met with a lot of inmates who were saying very grateful that we're taking these proactive measures. I mentioned that China, once they were able to get a containment on what was going on, it was because they were able to have people say, look, you are not, we are, they're taking social distancing to an extreme, not even letting people out in their front yard to let their dogs out. I read some articles where people talked about having to train their pets in their corner of their houses. So they're in their culture, they're able to take these steps. In our culture, it seems like in the corrections system, we're able to actually take these, which are the most effective steps to take to actually reduce the spread of this COVID-19.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical message. And maybe after I get done with this piece, you can talk about maybe all of us need this. Listen, my life right now, just like all of our staff, is coming to work every day, working, and then going home. And maybe I get the extra added bonus of stopping at the grocery store on the way home.
Sure.
Like that's and I'm not equating it, but what we're doing in the prisons, it's basically kind of forced or imposed social distancing, right? And I'll tell you, I get going stir crazy because you don't have a lot to do, and maybe you can kind of talk about things we can do both on the inside and the outside to stay productively occupied. But I can't stress enough, when you talk about China, I think the model is South Korea, and what they found in South Korea is they were really able to contain it and not get and have their surge, right? Have the high point of the disease be lower than it has to be. Let me describe that, because you hear flattening the curve, right? It's become a buzz phrase. And let me describe specifically what flattening the curve means, especially in our context. The curve is the when you plot the number of cases by day on a graph, the curve is how many cases increase, right? And flattening the curve means that our worst day is the apex of that curve. Our worst day is lower than it could be. And so when the governor started imposing stay-at-home orders in counties that were hard hit, the goal was to force or to highly encourage social distancing. And by less contacts, you have less cases. Less cases means that our worst day is going to be better than it was before. And here's the race in the community. The race in the community is keeping our worst day below the capacity of our hospital system, right? So when you're seeing states
that's enormous for people to understand, because that's the goal. That's the clear goal with this.
Yes. So think of it like this. Okay, I'm trying to work the camera here. It's not going well, but here's the curve of the disease, right? There we go. Here's the curve of the disease. If we can keep that below the curve of our medical capacity, we can keep serving the community. And that's what they're trying to do. And the same thing applies here. So, for instance, I think what Dr. Levine said, and this is somewhere in this ballpark, of everyone who gets the case, everyone who gets coronavirus, about 80% don't require hospitalization, right? So what we're talking about is not everyone will get it. And the steps we're taking is to have less people get it. So that's one front we're fighting this on. Of the people who get it, 80% are going to get relatively mild symptoms and not require hospitalization, right? And so that leaves 20% of everyone. So of everyone who gets the cases, 20% is the curve that we're really concerned about, and trying to keep that curve below the hospital capacity. And again, the same thing applies here. Now who's that 20%? I mean, folks who are vulnerable. We talked about vulnerable groups with pre-existing conditions. That's primarily who we worry about in that group. And then of that group, a percentage of that group will need intensive care, ventilators, those kinds of things. So again, if we can reduce the overall number, we don't come up against our medical capacity. And that all these fancy terms, what it comes down to is, if we can fight and be proactive and sanitize and stay away from people and wear masks, all this stuff gives us the potential to have less people get it. When less people get it, less people will ultimately end up in the hospital, and even less people will ultimately end up on a ventilator, and we will have the capacity to overcome this and get through, whether it be another 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or 8 weeks, and not have that peak so high. And then the lower the peak is, as we come out of it, we come out of it quicker. So a second part of our strategy then is population reduction. And I'd like to get to that, but can you talk about, like, especially for folks in sales or for us out here who are between our office and our house, or some folks are even not even leaving the house for anything. What are some of the things they can do to stay productively occupied and kind of keep their mind in the right place?
Yeah, so I think probably one of the most important strategies psychologically that I want to share with people is this. We have a tendency for our minds to want to match our bodies. I've talked about this a lot. If we down 3 energy drinks, our body's going to feel anxious, and then our mind's going to race to make up a story to make sense out of why we're anxious. For people like you and me who are ridiculously busy, if we drink too much caffeine, we're going to start thinking, oh, did I miss that meeting? Oh, should I have been here? Should I have been there? But for everyday people, when you're struggling with this kind of stuff, whatever's on your mind, you're going to try to create a story to match. And here's where this becomes a problem. When we have a lot of time on our hands, when we're isolated and we have a lot of time with our thoughts, then if we feel agitated or irritable, we can start to create conspiracy theories. We can start to create beliefs that we know what leaders are actually dealing with when we really don't. And so my hope for people is to say, when you start to feel off, instead of allowing your mind to just go to those places, at least give yourself what I would call a self-check. Say, wait a minute, do I really need to create this right now? Or maybe it's okay to sit with this emotion and recognize I don't feel comfortable. I'm in home, I'm stir crazy. I'm in my cell, I'm stir crazy. But I want to make sure I don't add to that story.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you said, one of the postures I've really encouraged our team to assume here is that first of all, I believe in Governor Wolf and Dr. Levine and their ability to manage this, right? And I know that they have the best information. I know they're capable, and I know they're acting in a manner that they think this is going to work out best. And that, for me, that expands to the federal level and that expands to the local level. And it's not just about what people who aren't in a leadership position are relying on leaders. This case more than ever, this is a two-way street, man. Like when I say I'm concerned, but I know we're going to get through this successfully, it's because I believe in the leadership that I work for. And I also believe in the folks who work for me. I know that people are pulling in the same direction. I know that because I got data. You know, we have only a handful of cases. We're screening everybody who comes in. Our incidents, our inappropriate behavior, misconducts, all that stuff is down, which tells me that we are really working together to try to overcome it. And frankly, we have to. Like, right. One of my favorite books, and at one point in my life, I had time to read, right? And it was this good to great book. And I just want to share this one analogy from that book. And they did an interview with Admiral Stockdale, who was the highest ranking naval official to be a prisoner of war during Vietnam. And obviously some prisoners of war survived and others did not, right? And so they asked him what was the difference. And this answer blew my mind until we put context around it. And he said, oh, that's easy. The people who believed they were going to get out didn't survive. Sounds very contra-intuitive, right? You would think that optimism is important, but he contextualized it. And he said, look, there was people who were incarcerated with me who would say, okay, let's say it's in November, and they go, okay, we're going to be out by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving would come and go. We're going to be out by Christmas. Christmas would come and go. We're going to be out by Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day would come and go, and their spirit would be broken. And so he connected it like this, and he called it the Stockdale paradox. Number one is acknowledge the brutal reality of the situation you're in, no matter how good or bad it is. Just be honest about where you're at. And in this context, where we're at is we got a disease that's easily transmitted between people that we don't even know who has it. So it's like an invisible disease. So that's the brutal reality of where we're at. But the second part is what really resonates with me. But understand and have a belief that you're gonna get through it, right? So it's a combination of being brutally honest about where you're at, and then understanding that you're gonna find a way. Like I steal your stuff all the time. There's a beginning, middle, and end to everything. Well, damn, there's a beginning, middle, and end to this. But the path to walk through it is, first of all, to walk through it. Second
Right.
of all, we have good strategies. Work the strategies. And then, trust me, when things change and we get information that there's something else that makes sense to put us in a better posture, we're going to do that. And I have to have the belief in the people above me and the people below me that everybody's intentions are where they need to be. And I'm not naive enough to think that's absolutely true, but I need to think that, and I need to believe that. And frankly, it looks like most people are pulling in the same direction, and that's why we're at where we're at, and that's how we're going to get through this.
Psychologically, the strategy you just were outlining is absolutely on point. It is the idea between, yes, we're going to get through it, but setting up arbitrary dates in our minds, not only for our staff, not only for the inmates, but for everyone else out there watching this. If you're creating an arbitrary date in your mind when you say it should be done by then yes, that's why I think what you just said is so important for people, because then you're let down. But the disease, the world's not letting you down. It's your own expectations. So it's hope. It's understanding there is a beginning, middle, and end, but also recognizing that we can't create the arbitrary dates for this because we don't know. So we have to be open to whatever might pop up along the way.
Yeah, and it's one of the more frustrating things about this. Like all of us want this to be over. Mm-hmm. All of us want to be able to go back to normal life, whatever that's going to look like at the other end of this. But the reality is, what we have to do is wake up every morning, find out what the best information is, and make the next right decision, doing the next right thing. That's where we're at. Let me kind of jump back to the second part of the strategy, which is trying to reduce the population within Department of Corrections. And I know there's all kinds of wild rumors, there's all kinds of stuff, and I just really think it's important that you know what we're doing. And the first thing we're doing is really focusing on things we can control, making sure parole hearings are still happening. Actually, the parole board is working to actually do more hearings. So there's some people who are beyond your minimum and haven't had your hearing yet. We're working hard to make sure everybody gets their hearings and use that normal process. That's absolutely true. We're relooking at people who are past their minimum, and maybe you're waiting to complete a program. We're looking to see if you can create that, complete that program in the community. Or can we deliver that program to you in your cell and you do that program, and we can then get you out because of that. That's another thing, another area we're able to look at and able to control. Now, there is discussions with the General Assembly on looking at a population of folks who are incarcerated and find out if we can create some kind of furlough program for that group. Those discussions are early on, but those discussions are happening in a real way. And we're really looking at folks who don't have a lot of time left to serve, and especially folks who have nonviolent offenses that don't involve victims and those kinds of stuff. That's
probably really important, because in dispelling rumors, there are a lot of people that in the community, I've had calls from people on my radio show say, well, are they just letting out anybody, and what is that? And so to be really clear, we're not just saying, you're not saying advocating or saying we're just opening the doors, everybody's coming out. It's folks that have nonviolent crimes that you're really looking at.
Well, we're looking at people who have earned their way out through the parole process, and people who, again, looking at potential legislation or some mechanism to get folks out, targeting primarily that folks, because it's not just simple. We're not just going to open the back door and let folks out. I mean, keep in mind, now more than ever, re-entry matters, right? So first thing we're going to do is be screening folks and making sure they don't have symptoms, right? Because that's really important. We want to make sure we're not adding to the problems in the community. Secondly, making sure folks have a place to live. Folks have their medical assistance turned on or have their insurance turned on. Connection to the medical infrastructure is really critical. It would not be responsible for us to just kick people out the door without any reentry plans. And for that reason, that's why we're prioritizing these groups, because it takes a lot of work to make sure that we're responsibly setting people up to be successful in the community. And now more than ever, that could mean somebody's life. Yeah. So we're not going to act haphazardly. Like I had a football coach that used to say, do it quick, but don't hurry. And I really never knew what the hell that meant, but now I get a sense for what that meant. I mean, we are working as fast as we can, but we can't be sloppy. We have to, for the community's sake, make sure we're still making good decisions as to who came back. And listen, over my tenure, our population is down 5,000. We have 5,000 less people than we did when I started, and crime rate is lower. So we've had a history of making good decisions as to who can get out, who can be successful in the community. Now we're applying that, but we have to pick up the pace, because it is absolutely true that the less people you contact, the less likely you are to get the disease, and the less people per square foot inside our facilities make our facilities safer. That's an absolute fact. And that's why this strategy is multiple, reducing contacts, limiting movement, all that kind of stuff, but also working to reduce our footprint. Those two have to work together, and then obviously make good decisions so people can get out and be healthy and successful and start rebuilding their lives, which is what we're really all about.
Well, and I read in an interview you had mentioned this past week, and just to give folks an idea of the mindfulness of what this is. In the past, somebody might have been out and then just jump on a bus, or they might have jumped out and they go right to this job. But this is really important to understand that the jobs, there are a lot of jobs that are disrupted significantly. I'm not sure that we can put somebody on a bus, because I'm not sure the bus schedules are operating. So I think people understanding that you're factoring this into the decision too, which is if we really want people to get out and stay out, we need to set them up for success.
We have a responsibility to the community, to individuals in our system, to individuals who work in our system, to set people up for success every day. That, at the end of the day, you can call everything we do whatever you want. At the end of the day, we're trying to set everybody up so they can be successful. Successful in this context means healthy, disease-free, and ready to wake up tomorrow healthy and disease-free, right? And so all these things are coming together. But yeah, it's almost hard for me to remember, but in the weeks before this hit, I was traveling around the state meeting with employers who needed employees because unemployment was so low. It's hard to even remember that. What reentry looked like before this started and what reentry looks like today is night and day. It looked like employers, 65% of the people on parole in Pennsylvania had a job before this hit. Now our focus is that Maslow's hierarchy, the bottom level, a safe place to live, a way to get food, access to medical care. That's where we're at. Reentry looks like that. Yep. And so for us to really maximize our ability to safely release people who are ready to go home, it is really about taking folks who are ready to go, who have things in place, so we can get as many folks through our normal processes as possible. And that's really the posture we're in. And again, I want to start wrapping this up, because there's a lot. People only have so much time, but I got to tell you that I just again bring it back to how much appreciation I have for our staff. First of all, coming in to work in an environment where you have worries well beyond the walls, right? And well beyond your parole districts and your parole offices and your halfway houses. You have real life stuff, but you put that stuff to the side and you come to work and you do the difficult job you do every day. Like a sincere appreciation and thanks for being modern day heroes who get lost in the shuffle when they talk about everybody else.
That's true.
And I think that's critical.
That is critical. So I've been following your lead with that too. And I've been seeing that, expressing that gratitude, because the truth is I'm super grateful for all the workers that go in there and do this. Our frontline staff, nurses, doctors in the world are getting thanked as they should. There's not enough gratitude for them. But I also want to thank all those officers who are out there doing it every single day. It's absolutely enormous. I have one more psychological piece, and then I want to ask you next steps, and we'll wind it down. But my one little psychological piece is this. When you're stuck in isolation, at times, we have a tendency to fall victim to something called hindsight bias. In other words, we watch the decisions that are made, then we see how they play out, and now with that information, we start to go back in our minds and say, well, why didn't they do this, or why didn't they do that? But the truth is, we make the best decisions with the information that we have in any given moment. And it's wise not to fall victim to that hindsight bias, because you can really convince yourself that you knew something that you simply did not know. We only know it once we make that decision. You're making the best decisions that you can. So that's my hope. Folks, make sure you're mindful of that hindsight bias. What are the next steps for the Department of Corrections?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the basics, right? It starts with the basics. Wash your hands frequently. Keep your areas clean. Sanitize, sanitize, sanitize. Stay healthy. Healthier people are less likely to get this. Wear your mask when you're around people. Social distancing. All that stuff is critical. Do the right thing. Keep pulling in the right direction. Don't overreact to rumors you hear, right? Our facility leadership teams are walking around and talking and giving you real-time information. I think that's the first thing. Secondly, on our end, we're going to continue to get the best information and make the best decisions. We're certainly going to look to make sure we're maximizing our existing mechanisms for individuals who've earned their way out of prison to get out. We're going to continue working with partners in the General Assembly. Some of our advocacy groups have been just remarkable in working with us and giving us ideas and trying to all get through this together. I'll say FAM in particular, we've worked with, and they've really been helpful in trying to get us to work through this and pull through this together. So we got to keep that up, and we got to keep understanding that, listen, the us versus them in this context, the them is the virus, right? And we have to pull in the same direction. And I got to tell you, now more than ever, we need each other. We need each other to get through this. And we have to just continue in that posture. But again, I am confident that the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections is going to get through this and going to get through this as good as it's possible to get through in an agency like this. I mean, I could tell you, if we had more time, I'd tell you stories time after time. There's going to be a story running this week about one of our parole officers who's making masks for people in their community after they work all day, having to wear a mask themselves. And, officers, I can tell you about a sergeant last week who saved somebody from choking at a meal. And, these heroic stories, I wish I had time to tell you that. But I also will tell you, now more than ever, it's important to thank people and let people know you appreciate them and be more polite. And it sounds corny, but I got to tell you, everybody's tense. Everybody's worked up. And our best path forward is to just take care of each other and just be polite, do the right thing, and understand, again, accept the brutal reality of the situation we're in, but have that confidence that know that we're going to get through it.
Exactly. I definitely believe in all of that. I think this is a strategy that helps not only in the Department of Corrections with staff, with inmates, but also with the general population. These are really sound methodologies that we're talking about that I'm hoping that it will resonate with people. My hope is that people don't sit back and think, well, it's just this or just that. The majority of people are really expressing gratitude for what you're doing and the policies you're putting into place. Of course, we'll always have people who think something else should be done and this and that. What I would also invite people to do is not focus on those people. People are struggling. Of course they're struggling. It's understandable. I understand why people might want to lash out, but ultimately I'd like to focus on what we can do, what we are doing, and what we will do as we move forward. Secretary Wetzel, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is so important.
All right, man. Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll circle back when there's more news or when time to update this. I would love to be able to circle back and do this again and just give people an update. And, I appreciate your contribution. Having, as everyone knows, I was a C student. So I don't have all those books behind me that you do. So it's nice that you can break it down so the common man can understand it.
Somebody asked me the other day, did you really read all those books? I said, my goodness, that's all I have going for is my intellect. So yes, I read all these books. Hey, thank you so much. To everybody out there watching, stay safe, do the things that Secretary Wetzel recommended, washing your hands, wearing that mask, and taking care of yourself. And we will have him on again in the future. Until next time, as always, I wish you much peace.